Hello, glass breakers. I am Sabrina Mirage Naeem, and this is a bonus episode where I asked Julie Kay to sit back down with us after our previous conversation with Kitty Colbert, where we got to talk about their book, Controlling Women: What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedoms. And now that is more a reality than ever. It was an episode we launched a couple of months ago. It was something where we had the conversation even back then at the time, before this Supreme Court opinion leaked that Roe v. Wade will likely be overturned next month. And Kitty and Julie, even at that time, were extremely sure that that was going to happen. So now here we are. Julie, thank you for joining me again.
Well, thank you for having me back, Sabrina. And as you said, before we got on air, it's under difficult circumstances, but not a complete surprise.
Yes, yes. And although not a complete surprise, and although we had this conversation before, and you and Kitty were even preparing for it for a long time, given you had written this book, this is something that you had anticipated would happen. I'm still curious to know, where were you? What were you doing when you saw Justice Alito's draft leaked? It's kind of like a Kennedy assassination moment. Like, where were you at that moment? And how did you react, even though you knew? I'm curious to know what your human reaction was.
Yeah, I mean, my human reaction, it was still like a kick in the uterus. I mean, it was just so appalling to read. I first found out about actually a male colleague friend of mine texted me, and he's not even a colleague in the reproductive rights space. And I think in some ways that was appropriate because it was people who kind of knew this work and cared and followed along, but still thought this is never going to happen. Or if it happens, it's not going to happen like this. So to have it come out as a leak was unprecedented, but I think for me, the real sinking feeling came when I read Justice Alito's draft. It just was cruel. It was inaccurate historically as far as about abortion, and it was really shameless in how it was attacking the court's own precedent in Roe.
Was that surprising for you? Was that kind of the most surprising component, was how it was written and what was referenced in it?
I think the most surprising thing is, we all have an inner optimist if we do this work, because otherwise you would either not get out of bed or move to another country or do something else, I think. So that was, I think, when you know something like that is likely to happen, and we know when we lost the election in 2016 that Donald Trump was going to get the court. And still, I was surprised by the time he appointed Amy Coney Barrett to the court. So it's kind of a series of, an elevator going lower and lower. And I don't think we've hit bottom. And I think that's something to be very mindful of as well, that the way the opinion is drafted and the way it attacks the whole premise of privacy rights, that Roe and many, many other decisions were written based upon that privacy right. That's, I think, a whole other level of chill that came out of reading that draft.
Yeah, and to be clear, again, this is something that we do want to specify for our audience time and time again, that this was a leaked draft. Roe v. Wade has not yet been overturned. We are anticipating that it likely will be next month in June, but it hasn't yet. This is kind of just the road to getting there. And that also, like you mentioned, there are a lot of other decisions that will be impacted by this, not least of which is Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which your colleague Katie Colbert was the one who argued in front of the Supreme Court in 1992. And that was kind of her big landmark case. And that one will also be overturned. So what sticks out to you in terms of the national response over the past 2 weeks?
I think the national response has been heartening. I think people are angry and outraged, and they're looking at ways to direct those feelings. I think it's all of a sudden become personal to many people, whether it's personal because they are in a position where they might sometime have an unplanned pregnancy, or whether it's personal because it's their friends, lovers, wives, mothers, daughters, you name it in our circle. 1 in 4 women in America has had an abortion, which means that everybody knows somebody. My unscientific data reveals that 1 in 1 women in America have had a pregnancy scare, a time when she thought she might be pregnant and didn't want to be. And I think even for people who aren't going to become pregnant or never did, the idea of living in a country that criminalizes women's health care is really doesn't align with our values. It's not who we are. It's not where we want to be. So I think the combination of protests in the street and online, as well as just the conversations that I've been having with people one on one, has been very important. And, Sabrina, you made a great point earlier that Roe is still the law of the land. Um, I was in Mississippi last month and talking to activists who were not directly working on reproductive rights, but were working in education, empowerment, and other areas around sort of, I guess you'd say like kids' ability to exist and thrive in a very poor part of Mississippi, a very under-resourced part of Mississippi. And they thought that abortion had already been overturned in the Mississippi case. And so there's a real chilling effect going on in this country, even from having the draft, even from having the Texas ban in effect, even from having Mississippi, that people are watching their own backs and very fearful of the kinds of prosecutions that we're seeing, that we saw in Texas and other places. So I think the flip side of that coin is what we can do now. We don't have to wait because, the time is here to start taking action. And I've seen a lot of energy in that direction.
Yeah, and the lion's share of this conversation will really be those tangible steps that we can take. But before we get there, I do want to just say that, in terms of the national response, I think it's so clear that it is reflecting the fact that most Americans are supportive of abortion, even with all the nuance, even with all the complications and feeling all kinds of ways about it. That unfortunately the legislatures right now are not reflecting what most Americans feel, and it's not representing America. So that's something that's really important to acknowledge.
And if I can just add to that, because I think that is so important, 70% of Americans support the Roe versus Wade framework, where they think this is a decision that a woman should make in consultation with her doctor. Though that's a slightly older number, I've seen some preliminary data that's come out since the draft leak, and those numbers are going up, that even more people feel more strongly about abortion rights being supported now. And so it is a winning political issue, so to speak. And moreover, it's a human rights issue that shouldn't be put through this kind of political fighting and fracture. But alas, that's where we are.